My name is Joe Parker, 34 years old, born into a family that built homes but couldn't build trust. For 15 years, I poured everything into our construction company, believing someday it would be mine. Then came that dinner when my parents announced their retirement, looked me in the eye, and handed everything to my cousin Marcus. He deserves it more, they said. You'll understand someday. I smiled and backed off, but I wasn't backing down. If you're watching this from a place where family betrayal hit you hard too, hit subscribe and stay with me. You'll want to see how sometimes the best revenge isn't what you'd expect. Growing up in the shadow of Parker Construction wasn't just part of my childhood, it was my childhood. My grandfather Thomas Parker started the business with nothing but a pickup truck, a toolbox, and a reputation for honest work. Every weekend while other kids played video games, I tagged along with my dad to job sites breathing in sawdust and watching homes rise from nothing but dirt and dreams. The earliest memory I have is sitting on my dad's shoulders as he walked through the wooden skeleton of what would become the Westlake Community Center. I was 5 years old, wearing a plastic yellow hard hat that kept sliding down over my eyes. Dad would point to different parts of the structure, naming each beam and joist, teaching me the language of building before I even mastered basic arithmetic. "This is our legacy, Joey," he would say. "Someday all of this will be yours to carry forward." By 12, I was spending summers learning to hammer nails straight sandwood until it felt like silk and read blueprints. The other workers, grown men with calloused hands and sun-weathered faces, would ruffle my hair and call me little boss. They knew what I knew: Parker Construction was my future. After high school, I went to State University for a business degree. Not because I wanted to leave construction behind, but because Dad said, to build this company higher, you need to understand the foundation of business. 4 years of accounting management and marketing classes later, I graduated with honors and stepped into my official role at Parker Construction. That was the same summer my cousin Marcus first appeared at the company picnic. Marcus was my Uncle Robert's son, but we barely knew him growing up. Uncle Robert had moved across the country after some falling out with my dad years ago. When Robert died unexpectedly of a heart attack, Marcus, then 26, reconnected with our family. My parents welcomed him with open arms, arms that seemed to stretch wider for him than they ever had for me. Where I had dirt under my fingernails and practical knowledge of every aspect of construction, Marcus had a winning smile and stories that made my parents laugh until tears streamed down their faces. Where I understood load-bearing walls and profit margins, Marcus understood how to make people feel special with just a few well-placed compliments. Still, I didn't begrudge him joining the family business. There was plenty of room, and truthfully, I appreciated having family my age around the office. My parents put him in sales where his charm could be put to good use, while I continued overseeing operations, managing crews, and developing our expansion strategy. For the next 10 years, I lived and breathed Parker Construction. I was the first one in the office each morning, and the last to leave. I learned every employee's name, their kids' names, their struggles and strengths. I modernized our bidding process, introduced eco-friendly building practices that won us government contracts, and developed relationships with suppliers that cut our material costs by nearly 20%. Under my guidance, our workforce doubled from 30 employees to 60, and our annual revenue grew from $3 million to $12 million. We expanded from residential construction to commercial projects, even landing the contract for the new City Hall, a project my grandfather would have never dreamed possible for our once small family business. Every milestone, every achievement I shared with my parents. Mom would bake my favorite apple pie when we landed a big contract, and Dad would take me fishing to celebrate the completion of difficult projects. These quiet moments of approval meant everything to me. The business was the river that ran through our family, connecting us even when words failed. Meanwhile, Marcus rose through the ranks on the sales side. I had to admit he was good at what he did. Clients loved him, and he brought in several lucrative contracts. But there was something that always felt performative about his dedication. He never stayed late unless my parents were watching. He took credit for team successes, but distanced himself from failures. Little things perhaps, but they formed a pattern I couldn't ignore. As my parents approached retirement age, I noticed subtle shifts in the family dynamic. Dad started inviting Marcus to the high-level meetings that had once been just him and me. Mom began mentioning how Marcus reminded her of Dad in his younger years. At family dinners, My parents seemed to hang on Marcus's every word, while my updates about the business were met with polite nods. I tried to dismiss the growing knot in my stomach as simple insecurity. After all, Parker Construction was more successful than ever, consistently ranked among the most respected construction companies in the region. The community knew our name, trusted our work. Surely my parents recognized that much of this growth had happened under my guidance, with my sweat equity invested in every successful project. The company's 30th anniversary celebration should have been my moment of pride. We rented the ballroom at the Grand Hotel downtown, invited all our employees, major clients, and community partners. I spent weeks preparing a speech honoring my parents' legacy while subtly positioning myself as the natural successor. The future of Parker Construction seemed clear to everyone, except, as I would soon discover, my own parents. The dinner that changed everything happened on a Tuesday. Nothing special about the date, just an ordinary weeknight that would permanently divide my life into before and after. Mom had called that morning asking me to come over for a family discussion about the business. Her voice had that forced casual tone that immediately put me on alert, but I never could have prepared for what was coming. I arrived at my childhood home to find the dining room set with the good china, the set that only appeared for Thanksgiving and Christmas. Marcus's car was already in the driveway, which wasn't unusual lately. What was unusual was the bottle of 30-year-old scotch, open on the sideboard, my father's special occasion drink. "Joe, right on time," Dad said, clapping me on the shoulder with a hand that seemed to tremble slightly. Mom was arranging flowers that hadn't been there that morning. Marcus sat at the table looking simultaneously nervous and excited, like a kid trying to hide that he knew what his Christmas presents were. We made awkward small talk through the salad course, weather, local sports, nothing that explained the tension crackling in the air. Finally, as Mom served the roast beef, Dad cleared his throat and set down his fork. "Joe, Marcus, your mother and I have made a decision." He began, reaching for Mom's hand. "After 32 years, we've decided it's time to step back from Parker Construction. We're retiring effective the end of this quarter." The announcement wasn't entirely surprising. They were both in their 60s, and Dad's back problems had been getting worse. I'd been mentally preparing for this transition for years, had already drafted a succession plan that would ease them into retirement while I took the reins. I smiled, ready to discuss the details of the transition, when Dad continued. "We've given a lot of thought to the future leadership of the company," he said, not quite meeting my eyes, "and we've decided that Marcus will take over as Chief Executive Officer." The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked from my father to my mother, waiting for the punchline, the explanation, anything that would make sense of what I'd just heard. But their expressions, Dad's forced determination, Mom's tearful apology, confirmed this wasn't a joke. "I don't understand." I finally managed my voice, sounding distant to my own ears. "I've been working toward this my entire life. The company has flourished under my direction." "What?" "Joe, please try to understand," Mom interrupted, reaching across the table toward me, though I pulled my hand away before she could touch it. "This decision wasn't made lightly. Marcus deserves it more," Dad said firmly. "Someday you'll understand." Deserves it more. The phrase echoed in my head, each repetition another knife twist. I looked at Marcus, who had the decency to appear at least somewhat uncomfortable. "Joe, I hope we can still work together," he said, his voice dripping with practiced sincerity. "Your operational expertise is invaluable, and I'll need your support during this transition." In that moment, I saw clearly what was happening. This wasn't just a business decision. It was a betrayal so complete, so personal, that I couldn't process it fully. Years of dedication, innovation, loyalty, all of it dismissed with a phrase that explained nothing while revealing everything about how my parents truly saw me. "I see," I said, surprised at how calm I sounded when inside I was anything but, "and my role going forward." "You'll remain Chief Operations Officer," Dad said, relief evident in his voice, now that the worst was over. "Your position is secure, son." My position. As though that was what mattered, rather than the trust that had just been shattered. The rest of dinner passed in a blur. I remember nodding at appropriate intervals, even raising a glass, when Dad toasted the new chapter for Parker Construction. I remember the taste of ashes as I forced myself to swallow food I couldn't taste. Most clearly, I remember Marcus's expression, the subtle smirk, when my parents weren't looking the triumph poorly disguised as humility. After dinner, I excused myself as quickly as politeness allowed. In my car alone, in the darkness of my parents' driveway, I finally let the full weight of what had happened crash over me. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, using it to anchor myself as my world spun out of control. 15 years of my adult life, devoted to a future that had just been handed to someone else. A lifetime of believing I knew where I stood, only to discover I'd been standing on quicksand. The next morning I tried to talk to my parents privately. I drove to their house early, hoping to catch them before they left for work. Mom answered the door in her robe, surprise evident on her face. "Joe, we weren't expecting you. Is everything all right?" Nothing was all right, but I kept my voice steady. "I need to understand." "Why, Marcus? What did I do wrong?" She ushered me inside, where Dad was reading the newspaper at the kitchen table. He set it down slowly when he saw me, and I caught the quick glance he exchanged with Mom, a look loaded with meanings I couldn't decipher. "You didn't do anything wrong, son," Dad said, gesturing for me to sit. "You've been an exemplary leader for operations. The company wouldn't be where it is without you." "Then why?" I pressed. "Why give the top position to Marcus when I've been preparing for it my whole life?" Another glance between them. Mom busied herself making coffee nobody had asked for. "There are factors at play that you don't understand," Dad finally said. "Family considerations that go back years. Marcus has certain claims on the business that need to be honored." "Claims? What claims could he possibly have that supersede mine?" Joe, Mom interjected her voice, gentle but firm. "Some things in life aren't just about merit or preparation. Sometimes there are promises that need to be kept, obligations that can't be explained easily. We're asking you to trust that we've made this decision for good reasons." Trust. The irony wasn't lost on me. I left their house no wiser than when I'd arrived, but with one certainty, there was more to this story than they were telling me. Something deeper than simple preference for Marcus's leadership style or business acumen. In the days that followed, I went through the motions at work. I attended meetings, oversaw projects, maintained the facade of business as usual. But inside, I was calculating, observing, gathering information. Marcus wasted no time, asserting his new authority, scheduling meetings, without me changing processes I'd put in place, even reassigning some of my key team members. I smiled and backed off, not because I accepted what had happened, but because backing off gave me space to think, to plan, to understand what was really happening beneath the surface of my family's company. There was a puzzle here with missing pieces, and I intended to find every last one of them. The first week under Marcus's leadership felt like working in a funhouse mirror version of Parker Construction. Everything looked similar on the surface, but the proportions were wrong, the angles distorted. Marcus moved into the corner office that had been my father's, the office I had assumed would be mine one day. He replaced the practical furniture with sleek, modern pieces that looked impressive but offered little functionality. A metaphor, I thought, wryly for his entire approach to leadership. My own office remained unchanged, a small mercy in the midst of upheaval. Each morning, I arrived early, as always, reviewed the day's projects, and tried to maintain the operational excellence that had become our company's hallmark. But now decisions I would have made independently required Marcus's approval that often came late, if at all, as he prioritized lunches with potential clients over the daily functions that kept our business running. "Just trying to streamline communication," he explained with a practiced smile when I confronted him about a delayed approval that had cost us thousands in idle worker hours. "All roads lead to the CEO now. I'm sure you understand." I understood perfectly. This was about establishing dominance, reminding me daily of my new place in the hierarchy. What I didn't yet understand was why. Why my parents had chosen him. Why they believed he deserved it more. 3 weeks into the new regime, I noticed Marcus taking meetings with clients. I didn't recognize clients whose names never appeared in our project pipeline. Curious, I asked Linda, our receptionist, who had worked for Parker Construction since I was in high school, about these mysterious visitors. Some development company from the east side of the state, she whispered, glancing toward Marcus's closed door. Kendall Enterprises. Been in here 4 times this month. Marcus said not to schedule them in the system, just send them straight back when they arrive. Kendall Enterprises. The name meant nothing to me, but the secrecy surrounding the meetings raised red flags. That night I stayed late, waiting until the office emptied. With everyone gone, I made my way to Marcus's office. The door was locked, another new development under his leadership, but I had a master key my father had given me years ago for emergencies. Inside, I didn't touch his computer or lock drawers. I wasn't ready to cross that line yet, but I did notice a business card left carelessly on the desk blotter, Richard Kendall, CEO, Kendall Enterprises. I took a photo with my phone and left everything else undisturbed. Back home, a quick internet search revealed that Kendall Enterprises was a development corporation known for buying distressed properties, stripping their assets, and flipping them for profit. They had a reputation for aggressive tactics and had faced several lawsuits for questionable business practices. Not the kind of company Parker Construction had ever associated with under my father's or my guidance. The next day, I called an old college friend who now worked in commercial real estate. Kendall. Yeah, I know them, Jake said when I mentioned the name. Vultures. They swoop in when companies are vulnerable, leadership changes, financial troubles, that sort of thing. Why do you ask? Please tell me Parker Construction isn't getting involved with them. His answer intensified my suspicion that something wasn't right. I began paying closer attention to Marcus's movements, noting the dates and times of his meetings with Kendall representatives. I created a separate email address and set up a forwarding rule for certain company communications. Nothing confidential, just enough to keep tabs on any major changes Marcus might be implementing. My vigilance paid off 2 weeks later. While searching for a project file in our shared digital storage, I accidentally opened a folder that hadn't been there before. Inside were documents clearly not meant for my eyes: draft agreements between Parker Construction and Kendall Enterprises for the sale of our most valuable assets. Our equipment fleet, our commercial properties, even the land we owned for future development, all at prices well below market value. The pieces began to fall into place. Marcus wasn't planning to lead Parker Construction into the future. He was positioning to strip it for parts. The company my grandfather had built, that my father had grown, that I had modernized and expanded, Marcus saw it as nothing more than a cash cow to be slaughtered. My first instinct was to confront him directly, to storm into his office with printed evidence and demand answers. But something held me back. If Marcus was willing to betray the family business this way, what else might he be capable of? And more importantly, did my parents know what he was planning? Were they complicit, or were they victims too? I needed more information before making any moves. That opportunity came unexpectedly at a charity golf tournament the Chamber of Commerce hosted each year. Parker Construction always sponsored a hole, and this year was no different. What was different was seeing Frank Donovan, my father's oldest friend, and former legal counsel for the company before his retirement. Frank had always had a soft spot for me. He'd been the one to teach me to drive, to sneak me my first beer at a company picnic when I was 16, to advise me when I was considering which college to attend. If anyone might have insight into what was happening, it would be Frank. I made sure to partner with him for the back 9 holes, waiting until we were alone on the 11th tee to broach the subject. Frank, can I ask you something off the record? I said, adjusting my stance over the ball, about the company, and my parents' decision to hand it to Marcus. Frank's swing faltered mid-backswing. He lowered his club and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Joe, some things in families are complicated, he said carefully. Some promises get made that can't be unmade even when they should be. What promises, Frank? What's really going on here? He sighed, leaning on his club. It's not my place to tell family secrets. But I will say this. Look into the Westridge land deal from 30 years ago. Your grandfather Thomas and Richard Kendall's father Harold. There's history there that might shed some light on current events. That night, I dove into research. The Westridge development had been one of my grandfather's biggest projects, a planned community of upper-middle-class homes that had cemented Parker Construction's reputation in the region. But news archives revealed a controversy I'd never heard about: accusations that Thomas Parker had somehow cheated Harold Kendall out of his investment in the project, leaving the Kendall family nearly bankrupt while the Parkers prosperated. The accusations were never proven in court. The case was settled privately, but the timing aligned with my Uncle Robert's mysterious departure from the family business. And now 3 decades later, Richard Kendall was meeting secretly with Marcus, who had unexpectedly been handed control of our company. This wasn't just about Marcus's ambition or my parents' inexplicable preference for him. This was about the past, reaching into the present, old wounds reopened, old debts being collected. But why would my parents participate in the destruction of their own legacy to settle a decades-old dispute? And what was Marcus's real role in all this? I needed answers, but I also needed evidence. Concrete, irrefutable proof of what Marcus was planning. Only then could I hope to intervene, before it was too late. The discovery of the Westridge connection changed everything. This wasn't just about being passed over for a position I'd earned. It was about protecting a company that 3 generations of Parkers had built. But confronting Marcus directly would only alert him that I was onto his scheme, and going to my parents with half-formed suspicions might drive them further into Marcus's corner. I needed a strategy. My first step was reaching out to Sarah Winters, my college roommate's sister, who had become a successful corporate attorney. We met for coffee at a shop 20 miles from town, well away from any Parker Construction employees or associates who might report back to Marcus. "So, let me get this straight," Sarah said after I laid out what I knew. "You believe your cousin is planning to sell company assets to this Kendall Enterprises at below-market prices, potentially, as part of some decades-old vendetta. And you want to stop him without tipping your hand or alienating your parents." "Exactly. I need to gather evidence, legally build an airtight case, and present it in a way that can't be dismissed as jealousy or sour grapes." Sarah stirred her latte thoughtfully. "You need to document everything. Every unusual meeting, every unauthorized file, every deviation from standard operating procedures. Start keeping a journal with dates, times, and detailed observations. If you can legally obtain emails or documents proving the asset stripping plan, even better. And if I can prove it, what then? Then you have options. You could go to the board, though. If your parents control the voting shares, that might not help. You could present your evidence to your parents privately. Or, depending on how serious the situation is, you might need to consider legal action to protect the company's interests." The idea of suing my own family made my stomach turn, but I nodded anyway. "I'll start documenting today." "What about the Kendall angle? Should I try to learn more about their involvement?" "Carefully," Sarah warned. "The last thing you want is to alert them that you're investigating. But understanding their motivation might help you counter whatever they're planning." Armed with Sarah's advice, I developed a methodical approach. At work, I maintained the appearance of accepting my new role, even praising Marcus's decisions in public when they were sound, building a reputation as a team player rather than a disgruntled heir. Behind the scenes, I documented everything, created secure backups of important company files, and quietly consulted with trusted employees about any unusual requests or directions from Marcus. 2 weeks into my surveillance, fortune handed me an unexpected opportunity. The annual Builders Association Gala was approaching, a black-tie affair that brought together everyone in the regional construction industry. Parker Construction always purchased a table, and this year, Marcus had invited Richard Kendall as his personal guest. What Marcus didn't know, couldn't have known, was that the woman introduced as Catherine Kendall, Richard's daughter, and Kendall Enterprises legal counsel, had been 2 years behind me at State University. We hadn't been friends exactly, but we'd had enough mutual acquaintances that approaching her wouldn't seem suspicious. The night of the gala, I made sure to arrive early, positioning myself near the bar where I could observe arrivals. Marcus entered with Richard Kendall, a tall man with silver hair and cold eyes that assessed the room like he was calculating its value. Behind them came Catherine, elegant in a blue dress, her expression somehow at odds with her father's predatory demeanor. I waited until Marcus and Richard were deep in conversation with potential investors before approaching Catherine at the bar. "Bourbon neat," she told the bartender, then glanced at me. Recognition flickered across her face. "Joe Parker, right? State University Professor Wilson's Business Ethics Seminar." "Perfect." She remembered me. "Catherine Kendall. Good memory. Though if I recall correctly, you were arguing the pro-corporate position while I was defending labor rights." She laughed, accepting her drink from the bartender. "And now look at us both, In the family business, how the mighty idealists have fallen. Some ideals are worth holding on to, I countered, motioning for the bartender to bring me whatever she was having. Even in business. Something in her expression shifted slightly, a shadow crossing her features. Yes, well, the real world often demands compromise. For the next hour, I engaged Catherine in conversation that carefully skirted business while establishing a connection. We discovered shared interests in hiking and classical music, laughed about university memories, and generally built rapport. By the time we parted ways, I had her business card and an open invitation to contact her if Parker Construction ever wanted to explore synergies with Kendall Enterprises. Over the next month, I cultivated this new connection with strategic care. A casual email about a mutual acquaintance. A text when I spotted an article about a symphony performer she had mentioned enjoying. Small innocuous contacts that gradually painted me as a potential ally rather than an adversary. Meanwhile, at Parker Construction, Marcus grew bolder. He began restructuring departments without consulting the leadership team, replacing longtime employees with his own picks, and initiating a strategic review of our land holdings. All moves consistent with preparing for major asset sales. My documentation grew, as did my network of concerned employees, who discreetly kept me informed of Marcus's activities. But the smoking gun, the irrefutable evidence I needed, remained elusive. Marcus was careful to keep the most damning discussions offline, holding meetings outside the office, and using his personal email for sensitive communications. The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. After 6 weeks of casual contact, Catherine Kendall reached out to me directly, suggesting we meet for lunch. "Something professional I'd like to discuss," her text read. We agreed on a restaurant 30 minutes outside town-neutral territory. Catherine arrived looking troubled, her usual confident demeanor subdued. After ordering, she leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Joe, I'm taking a significant professional risk talking to you, but there are things happening between our companies that don't sit right with me." My heart raced, but I kept my expression neutral. "What kind of things?" "My father has a vendetta against your family. Something about your grandfather and a land deal gone wrong. It's become an obsession for him. Marcus has been working with him to essentially dismantle Parker Construction from within, selling off its most valuable assets to Kendall Enterprises at fractions of their worth." Though this confirmed what I'd suspected, hearing it stated so plainly still felt like a punch to the gut. "And your role in this?" Catherine looked down at her untouched salad. "I've been tasked with structuring the deals to make them appear legitimate. But they're not. They're designed to enrich Marcus personally, while allowing my father to destroy what your family built." She met my eyes. "I became a lawyer to uphold the law, not to help subvert it. What they're planning crosses ethical and legal lines I'm not willing to cross." "Why tell me this now?" "Because they're accelerating the timeline. The first major asset transfer, your equipment fleet, is scheduled for next month. After that, it will be harder to stop the bleeding." "Do you have documentation? Something concrete I could use to prove what's happening?" Catherine hesitated, then nodded slightly. "I can't directly provide company documents that would violate client confidentiality and could cost me my license. But I can point you toward what to look for and where. The rest will be up to you." By the time lunch ended, I had specific information about dates, account numbers, and file locations that would help me build my case. I also had something unexpected, a growing admiration for Catherine Kendall, who was risking her professional relationship with her father to do what she believed was right. Back at work, I used Catherine's information to locate the hidden documentation of Marcus's scheme. The picture it painted was worse than I'd imagined. Not just asset stripping, but a complete dismantling of Parker Construction, with Marcus receiving substantial kickbacks disguised as consulting fees for facilitating the deals. As I compiled my evidence, I noticed Marcus becoming increasingly wary around me. Twice I caught him watching me through the glass wall of his office, his expression calculating. Once I returned from lunch to find my computer showing signs of having been accessed in my absence. He suspected something, which meant my window of opportunity was closing fast. The final piece fell into place when Catherine texted me that Marcus had scheduled the equipment fleet sale to be finalized at a dinner meeting at my parents' house, a setting chosen deliberately to lend family approval to the cation-setting transaction. The date was set for the following Friday. I knew then what I had to do: This wasn't just about reclaiming my position or thwarting Marcus's ambitions. It was about saving a family legacy and exposing a decades-old deception before it destroyed everything my grandfather and father had built, everything I had helped build. My plan was simple but risky. I would attend the dinner, bringing along an unexpected guest whose presence would force the truth into the open. Catherine had agreed to accompany me, armed with her knowledge of the scheme and her personal integrity. Together, we would reveal Marcus and Richard Kendall's true intentions before the damage became irreversible. As Friday approached, I finalized my preparations, gathering my evidence into a comprehensive presentation and rehearsing what I would say. The confrontation to come would change my family forever. For better or worse remained to be seen. The week leading up to the dinner felt like the calm before a storm. At work, I maintained my facade of oblivious cooperation, even volunteering, to help Marcus prepare a presentation for a new client, a gesture that visibly caught him off guard. His suspicious glances became less frequent. His stance toward me marginally more relaxed. The illusion was working. He believed I had accepted my reduced role in the company. Behind the scenes, Catherine and I communicated daily, refining our approach and sharing new information. Our professional relationship had evolved into something more personal, though neither of us acknowledged it directly. There was something about joining forces against a shared injustice that created a unique bond between us. "My father is getting impatient," she texted on Wednesday. "He's pushing to move up some of the asset transfers. Marcus is trying to slow him down until after the dinner. Are you sure your parents don't know? What's really happening?" It was a question I'd asked myself repeatedly. Were my parents willing participants in this scheme, or unwitting pawns? The evidence suggested the latter. Marcus had kept them insulated from the details, feeding them only carefully curated information that portrayed the restructuring as necessary modernization. "I'm almost certain they're in the dark," I replied. "Marcus has been controlling their access to information, and they trust him completely for reasons I still don't fully understand." The morning of the dinner, I woke before dawn, my mind cycling through every possible scenario. What if my parents refused to listen? What if Marcus somehow prevented Catherine from speaking? What if this whole plan backfired and only accelerated the company's demise? I pushed the doubts aside and focused on final preparations. I confirmed with Catherine that she would meet me at a coffee shop near my parents' house, allowing us to arrive together. I double-checked that my evidence was properly organized on my tablet with backup copies in the cloud. I even had paper printouts of the most damning documents tucked into an inside pocket of my jacket, old school, but immune to technical failures. At work, I left early, telling my assistant I had personal matters to attend to. Marcus was already gone, presumably preparing for the evening ahead. As I walked through the office, I felt a strange mix of emotions: nostalgia for what Parker Construction had been, determination to save what it could still be, and underneath it all, a quiet anger that had been simmering since that first betrayal dinner. Catherine was waiting at the coffee shop, as planned, dressed professionally in a navy suit that conveyed both authority and approachability. Her presence calmed my nerves. "Ready?" she asked simply. "As I'll ever be," I replied, offering a smile that felt more confident than I actually was. We drove to my parents' house in my car, using the time to review our approach one final time. The plan was straightforward. I would introduce Catherine as a colleague interested in our business model. Once dinner was underway, and Marcus felt secure, we would gradually steer the conversation toward the Kendall Enterprises deal, ultimately revealing the full extent of the scheme and Catherine's role as our inside source. "Remember," Catherine said, as we pulled into my parents' driveway, "your cousin and my father are both skilled manipulators. They'll try to discredit us to frame this as personal or vindictive. We need to stay focused on the facts." I nodded, taking a deep breath. "Facts, not emotions." "Got it." The house looked just as it had the night of the original betrayal. My mother's garden in full bloom, the porch light casting a warm glow over the entrance. My father's car and Marcus's sleek sports car parked side by side. A picture of family harmony that masked the deception within. I rang the doorbell, Catherine standing slightly behind me. Mom answered, her smile of greeting freezing slightly when she registered Catherine's presence. "Joe, We weren't expecting you to bring a guest, she said, her hostess instincts quickly, overriding her surprise. Come in, come in. Mom, this is Catherine Kendall, I said, watching her face carefully for any recognition of the name. She's a business associate I thought might offer some valuable insight into the direction Marcus is taking the company. If Mom recognized the Kendall name, she didn't show it. She welcomed Catherine warmly and led us into the living room where Dad and Marcus were having drinks. Marcus's back was to us as we entered, so I had the momentary advantage of seeing Dad's face first. The surprise, the quick glance at Marcus, the forced smile. Joe brought a guest, Mom announced. Catherine Kendall, a business associate. Marcus turned drink in hand, his practiced smile already in place. Then his eyes locked on Catherine, recognition, dawning like a slow-motion car crash. The crystal wine glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor, red wine splashing like blood across the pale rug. In that moment of stunned silence, as Marcus stared at Catherine and wine seeped into my mother's favorite rug, I knew we had achieved the first part of our plan. We had broken through the facade. Now came the harder part, revealing the truth in a way my parents could accept. Marcus, Catherine said coolly, "What a coincidence. I didn't realize you'd be here tonight." The lie was deliberate, establishing her as separate from me in Marcus's mind, buying us precious seconds of confusion. Catherine is Richard Kendall's daughter, I explained to my perplexed parents, as Mom hurried to clean up the spilled wine. Richard Kendall, of Kendall Enterprises, the company Marcus has been meeting with repeatedly over the past 2 months. Marcus recovered quickly, his charm sliding back into place like a mask. What a small world. Catherine and I have been discussing potential collaborations, nothing concrete yet. Joe, you should have mentioned you knew the Kendalls. Collaborations. I repeated, my voice steady. Is that what we're calling it now? Not asset stripping, not the systematic dismantling of Parker Construction for personal profit. The room went still. Dad looked from me to Marcus, confusion giving way to concern. What is he talking about, Marcus? Marcus laughed, the sound, forced and hollow. Joe's upset about the succession decision, that's all. He's been looking for conspiracies where none exist. Catherine, I apologize for my cousin's behavior. Catherine stepped forward, her professional demeanor unwavering. Actually, Mr. Parker, I came here tonight because I have serious concerns about the deals being structured between our companies. Deals that would effectively transfer Parker Construction's most valuable assets to Kendall Enterprises at severely undervalued prices while providing substantial personal payments to Marcus. Mom sank onto the sofa, her face pale. Dad remained standing, his expression hardening into something I'd rarely seen, genuine anger. Marcus, he demanded, is this true? Of course not, Marcus scoffed. Catherine is clearly confused about the nature of our preliminary discussions. Or perhaps she's been misled by Joe, who has obvious reasons to undermine my leadership. It was time. I pulled out my tablet and opened the first document, a draft agreement between Parker Construction and Kendall Enterprises for the sale of our equipment fleet at 40% below market value, with a separate consulting fee of $200,000 payable to Marcus personally. This doesn't look like a preliminary discussion to me, I said, passing the tablet to my father. And neither do the other 12 documents I've found, all detailing different aspects of how Parker Construction would be stripped of its assets, its reputation, and ultimately its future, all to satisfy a 30-year-old vendetta between the Kendalls and the Parkers. A vendetta that somehow involves Uncle Robert, whose son Marcus seems to be the instrument of our company's destruction. The color drained from my parents' faces as they looked through the documents. Marcus's expression cycled rapidly, from denial to anger to desperate calculation. You don't understand the full picture, he tried, addressing my parents directly now. The company needs restructuring to remain competitive. These asset reallocations. Catherine interrupted, her voice sharp with disbelief. The equipment fleet sale alone would cripple Parker Construction's ability to fulfill its current contracts. The land transfers would eliminate any possibility of future growth. These aren't business decisions. They're execution orders for a company that took 3 generations to build. Dad looked up from the tablet, his eyes finding mine. Joe, how long have you known about this? I've been gathering evidence for weeks, I admitted. At first I thought Marcus was just making poor business decisions. Then I discovered the connection to Kendall Enterprises and started looking deeper. Catherine approached me when she realized what was really happening. "And you, Dad," asked Catherine, "why risk your position with your father's company to stop this?" Catherine straightened, meeting his gaze directly. "Because what they're planning isn't just bad business, it's potentially fraudulent. As an attorney, I have ethical obligations that supersede family loyalty when the law is being broken. And as a person, I couldn't participate in destroying something that's clearly meant so much to so many people for so long." Marcus made one last desperate attempt. "Uncle David, Aunt Susan, you know me. You know why you chose me to lead the company. Are you really going to believe these accusations from a bitter cousin and a woman who's betraying her own father?" At the mention of why they had chosen him, another silent look passed between my parents, a look loaded with decades of unspoken history. "Marcus," my mother said quietly, "we chose you because we were trying to honor a promise, but we never promised to let you destroy what this family has built." The dinner that followed was unlike any our family had experienced before. As dishes grew cold on the table, the full story emerged from all sides. Marcus's deception, my investigation, Catherine's ethical stand, and finally, the decades-old secret that had set everything in motion. The living room felt too small for the storm brewing within it. Mom had given up all pretense of serving dinner, instead pouring herself a generous glass of wine. Dad sat with the tablet still in his hands, scrolling through document after document of evidence. Marcus stood by the fireplace, his earlier charm evaporated into tense vigilance. Catherine and I remained side by side on the sofa, presenting a united front. "I think," Dad said, finally setting down the tablet, "that it's time for the whole truth to come out, all of it." Marcus shook his head sharply. "Uncle David, think about what you're doing. Some things are better left." "No," Dad interrupted, his voice carrying an authority I hadn't heard in years. "This has gone too far. The secrets and the half-truths, they've done enough damage." He turned to me, his expression heavy, with decades of unspoken burdens. "Joe, there's something you need to understand about Marcus, about why your mother and I felt he deserved to lead the company." Mom reached for his hand, squeezing it in silent support. "Marcus isn't just your cousin," Dad continued. "He's your half-brother." The words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and disorienting. I looked at Marcus, seeing his features in a new light, searching for, and finding echoes of my father in the shape of his jaw, the set of his eyes. "That's not possible," I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "He's Uncle Robert's son." Dad shook his head, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "Robert agreed to claim Marcus as his when he was born to preserve the family's reputation and my marriage to your mother. The truth is, I had a brief relationship with Marcus's mother before your mother and I were married. When she told me she was pregnant, Robert, always the protective older brother, offered to marry her and raise the child as his own. Which is why Mom added softly, when Robert died and Marcus reconnected with us, we felt we owed him something. A place in the family business. A chance to be acknowledged, if not publicly, at least in a meaningful way." The revelation shifted the ground beneath me, rearranging my understanding of my family history like pieces of a kaleidoscope falling into a new pattern. So many things suddenly made sense. My parents' inexplicable favoritism toward Marcus, their cryptic statement that he deserved it more, their willingness to set aside my years of dedication for a newcomer. But it explained nothing about the Kendall connection or Marcus's apparent determination to dismantle the company. "That still doesn't justify what he's been planning," I said, struggling to keep my voice level. "Being your son, your other son, doesn't give him the right to destroy what 3 generations have built." Marcus laughed bitterly. 3 generations of Parkers profiting off the destruction of others. "Did Uncle David, Dad, ever tell you what Grandfather Thomas did to Harold Kendall, how he manipulated property records, falsified surveys, and essentially stole the Westridge development right out from under the Kendalls?" "That's not exactly," Dad began, but Marcus cut him off. "The great Parker legacy is built on fraud and theft," he continued, gaining momentum. "Harold Kendall died, broke and disgraced, because of what Thomas Parker did. His son Richard spent decades rebuilding what your grandfather destroyed." Catherine stepped forward, her calm professionalism a counterpoint to Marcus's escalating emotion. "That may be true, Marcus, but it doesn't justify what you and my father have been planning." Responding to a historical wrong with another wrong doesn't create justice, it just perpetuates a cycle of harm. She's right, I added. If grandfather did what you claim, that's between him and his conscience. But the Parker Construction of today, the company that employs 60 people, that built the hospital wing where children receive cancer treatment, that donates materials and labor to habitat restoration projects, that company doesn't deserve to be destroyed for sins committed before I was even born. Marcus's expression hardened. Easy for you to say you grew up with everything. The Parker name, the family business, the certainty of your place in the world. I grew up with a mother who died young, and a father. Well, I guess he wasn't actually my father who resented me, as a living reminder of his brother's betrayal. For the first time, I glimpsed the depth of Marcus's pain, a lifetime of feeling like an outsider, of carrying a secret identity he couldn't acknowledge, of watching from afar as the family that should have been his prospered without him. But understanding his pain didn't excuse his actions. So your solution was to partner with Richard Kendall to destroy the company I asked. To take what my parents gave you in good faith and use it to satisfy someone else's decades-old vendetta. Richard Kendall recognized my situation. Marcus replied, an edge of defensiveness in his voice. He offered me a chance at real wealth independence recognition, everything the Parkers had denied me for 34 years. At the cost of 60 jobs, a company legacy, and the trust of the people who finally welcomed you into the family I countered. Was that price worth paying? A heavy silence filled the room. Dad stood up, slowly walking to the mantelpiece where family photos chronicled the Parker history, including several recent ones featuring Marcus. Marcus, he said, his voice weary, but firm, what happened with the Kendalls all those years ago was complicated. My father made decisions. I'm not proud of decisions that hurt people. But that doesn't justify what you've been planning. This company isn't just about the Parker name, it's about every employee who depends on it, every client who trusts us, every project that makes our community better. Mom joined him, her face showing the strain of the evening's revelations. We gave you leadership of the company because we thought you deserved to have what Joe had always had, a secure place in the family, a legacy to call your own. We never intended for you to use that position to destroy what we've all worked to build. Marcus looked from my parents to me, then to Catherine, his expression shifting between defiance and uncertainty. For a moment, I thought he might continue to deny everything to fight against the mounting evidence of his betrayal. Instead, something in him seemed to crumble. You don't understand what it's like, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. To grow up knowing you're living someone else's life. To discover the truth and realize that everything could have been different. Maybe not, I acknowledged, finding unexpected compassion rising alongside my anger. But I do understand loyalty and responsibility and the weight of carrying on something bigger than yourself. Those aren't just words, Marcus. They're choices we make every day. Dad turned from the photos to face Marcus directly. The agreement with Kendall Enterprises, how far has it progressed? Can it still be stopped? Marcus hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Nothing's been signed yet. Richard wanted the equipment sale finalized tonight, but I convinced him to wait until after this dinner. Said I needed your symbolic blessing to avoid raising suspicions later. And if we refuse to proceed, Dad pressed. If we cancel all negotiations with Kendall Enterprises? Richard won't take that well, Marcus admitted. He's invested a lot in this plan. The personal payments to me were just the beginning. He has buyers lined up for most of the Parker assets already. Catherine spoke up. My father can be intense when he doesn't get what he wants, but his leverage depends entirely on Marcus's cooperation as CEO. Without that, he has no legal path to Parker Construction's assets. All eyes turned to Marcus. The next words out of his mouth would determine not just his future, but the future of Parker Construction and everyone connected to it. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so similar to my father's that I wondered how I had never noticed the resemblance before. Then he sank into the nearest chair, the fight visibly draining out of him. It's over, he said simply. I won't go through with it. Maybe I never really wanted to deep down. Maybe I just wanted to be seen to matter enough that someone would stop me. Relief washed over my parents' faces, but I wasn't entirely convinced. How do we know this isn't just another manipulation? that you won't continue working with Kendall behind our backs." "You don't," Marcus acknowledged. "Trust has to be earned back. I understand that. But for what it's worth, I'm done being Richard Kendall's instrument of revenge. Whatever happened between our grandfather and his father, it's not worth destroying more lives over." Dad nodded slowly. "Tomorrow, first thing we meet with the company lawyers. We reverse any preliminary agreements, secure our assets, and make it clear to Kendall Enterprises that Parker Construction is not for sale, not in whole, not in parts. And after that, I asked the question encompassing far more than just business logistics." Dad looked from me to Marcus, then to Mom, whose eyes shone with unshed tears. "After that, we start rebuilding. Not just the company, but this family. No more secrets, no more unspoken resentments. We've all made mistakes, all held onto hurts for too long." He turned to me specifically. "Joe, you've proven your loyalty, and you're worth 100 times over. The company should have been yours to lead. We see that now. Your mother and I let our guilt over the past cloud our judgment about the future. I hope someday you can forgive us for that." The acknowledgement I'd waited months to hear felt both validating and strangely hollow in the wake of everything else I'd learned. This wasn't just about a business decision anymore. It was about redefining what family meant, about finding a way forward. With a half-brother I'd known only as a cousin, about reconciling the image of my parents. I'd held my whole life with the flawed, complex people standing before me now. "I think," Catherine said, gently reading the room, "this family might need some time alone to process everything. I should go." "Stay," I said, surprising myself with the request. "You've been part of bringing the truth to light, and we could use an objective perspective as we figure out next steps." She hesitated, then nodded, settling back onto the sofa beside me. As the night wore on, more truths emerged. Painful, necessary truths about the past and present. My father explained the full history, with the Kendalls acknowledging the ethical shortcuts his father had taken that had indeed harmed their family. Marcus shared more about his childhood, about discovering his true parentage after Robert's death, about the anger and sense of entitlement that had made him vulnerable to Richard Kendall's manipulations. Gradually, the atmosphere shifted from confrontational to contemplative, from exposing betrayals to exploring possibilities for redemption. By the time dawn lightened, the windows exhausted, but clearer-eyed, we had the beginnings of a path forward for the company, for the family, for all of us individually. As we prepared to leave Catherine and I to her apartment, Marcus to his, all of us planning to reconvene later that day with clear heads, Dad pulled me aside for one last private word. "Joe," he said quietly, "I need you to know something. When we said Marcus deserved the company more, we never meant he deserved it more than you. We meant he deserved it more than nothing, which is what he'd had from us his whole life. It was our shame talking our guilt, not any real assessment of your worth or his." I nodded, too emotionally spent for more words. Some hurts would take longer to heal than others. Some trusts longer to rebuild. But as Catherine and I stepped out into the morning light, I felt something I hadn't experienced since that first betrayal dinner months ago: hope. The weeks following that revelatory night unfolded like a carefully orchestrated reset of everything I thought I knew about family loyalty and justice. The first order of business was securing Parker Construction against further threat from Kendall Enterprises. With Catherine's legal expertise guiding us, we formally terminated all negotiations, documented the attempted asset stripping scheme, and made it clear that any further action against our company would result in legal consequences. Richard Kendall couldn't afford financially or reputationally. His reaction was predictably furious, but ultimately impotent. Without Marcus as his inside man, his leverage evaporated, leaving him with nothing but decades-old grievances that held little weight in the present. Catherine bore the brunt of his anger, effectively severing her professional relationship with her father's company in the process. "I always wanted to break away eventually," she told me over coffee, the week after, her expression more relieved than regretful. "I just needed the right reason, the right moment." Helping save Parker Construction from my father's vendetta seems like a pretty good one. Within Parker Construction itself, changes came swiftly but thoughtfully. My parents called a board meeting to publicly acknowledge the mistakes in judgment they had made, formally reinstating me as the heir apparent to lead the company upon their full retirement. Marcus stepped down as CEO, but remained with the company in a newly created role, overseeing client relations, a position that utilized his natural charm while keeping him at arm's length from financial decisions until trust could be rebuilt. The transition wasn't seamless. Some employees who had been displaced during Marcus's brief tenure chose not to return. Others harbored lingering doubts about the company's stability after coming so close to disaster. Rebuilding confidence both internally and with our clients required transparency about what had happened and clear commitments to maintaining the values that had made Parker Construction successful for 3 generations. More challenging than the professional recalibration was the personal one. Learning that Marcus was actually my half-brother forced me to reevaluate every interaction, every assumption, every feeling I'd had about him since his arrival in our lives. The resentment I'd harbored transformed into something more complex. Not forgiveness exactly, but a tentative understanding of the forces that had shaped his choices. We began meeting weekly for lunch away from the office, and the watchful eyes of employees still adjusting to our new dynamic. Our conversations were awkward at first, loaded with unspoken tensions and the weight of revelations still settling between us. "I envied you my whole life," Marcus admitted during one such lunch 3 weeks after the confrontation. "Not just the Parker name or the business, but the certainty you had about who you were, where you belonged." That certainty was an illusion, I pointed out, stirring my coffee absently. I thought I knew exactly where I stood in the family and the company, and I was wrong about both. He nodded, acknowledging the truth in that. For what it's worth, I think I always knew I wouldn't go through with the full Kendall plan. Maybe I just wanted to feel powerful for once, to make the Parkers, our father, see me as someone who mattered enough to stop, not just someone to placate with a title. "You matter," I said simply, "not because you're David Parker's son, but because you're a person with choices. Good, bad, or in between those choices define you more than your birth ever could." The relationship between Marcus and our parents underwent its own evolution. Years of guilt had led them to overcompensate when he re-entered their lives, elevating him without the proper foundation of trust and shared values that should have come first. Now they worked to establish a more honest connection, acknowledging him openly as David's son, but also holding him accountable for his actions, in a way they hadn't before. My mother, always the family's emotional compass, found particular purpose in helping bridge the gaps between all of us. Family isn't just blood, she reminded us during a Sunday dinner 2 months after the revelation. It's showing up for each other, being honest, even when it's hard, choosing to forgive when you have every right to walk away. As summer turned to fall, Parker Construction stabilized under joint leadership, my father still nominally at the helm, with me handling day-to-day operations and strategic planning. We implemented new transparency measures in all major business decisions, ensuring that what happened with Marcus and Kendall could never happen again. Throughout this period of rebuilding, Catherine remained a constant presence, her initial role as ally, evolving into something deeper and more personal. Our shared experience, exposing the truth, regardless of personal cost, had forged a connection that transcended professional collaboration. "You know," she said one evening, as we walked along the riverfront park downtown, "most people don't start relationships by bringing down corporate conspiracies together. We might have done this backwards." I laughed, reaching for her hand. "I don't know. Seeing someone willing to risk everything for what's right, that tells you a lot more about character than a dozen ordinary dates would." "True," she agreed, intertwining her fingers with mine. "Though I wouldn't mind some ordinary dates now, just for balance." Those ordinary dates became a counterweight to the extraordinary circumstances that had brought us together: dinners without family drama, weekend hikes where business never came up, quiet evenings building something new instead of salvaging what had almost been lost. 6 months after the night that changed everything, we gathered at my parents' house again, not for confrontation this time, but for celebration. Parker Construction had secured its largest contract ever, a sustainable community development that embodied the values our company had always stood for. Everyone who had weathered the storm was there. My parents, Marcus, with a new humility that suited him better than his former arrogance, key employees who had kept faith during uncertain times, and Catherine, who had recently joined our legal Blant team officially. As we raised glasses to toast the achievement, I looked around at the faces of these people who had become in different ways. My definition of family, not just those related by blood, but those bound by shared purpose, by choices to stand together when standing apart would have been easier. My father, catching my eye across the room, nodded slightly, an acknowledgement of how far we had come, of lessons learned at nearly devastating cost. Later that evening, as the gathering wound down, I found myself alone with Catherine on the back porch, the autumn air crisp around us. "Do you ever think about how differently this all could have gone?" she asked, leaning against the railing. "If we hadn't intervened, if Marcus had completed my father's plan, or if my parents had never told the truth about Marcus being my brother," I added. "If we'd all just kept playing our assigned roles without questioning the script." "The company would be gone," Catherine said. "Your family might never have recovered, and we might never have found each other." I finished, drawing her closer. She rested her head against my shoulder. "Sometimes losing what you think you want leads you to what you actually need." Those words crystallized something I'd been feeling throughout this journey, a truth I hadn't fully articulated until now. The betrayal that had initially seemed like the end of everything I valued had actually been the catalyst for greater honesty, deeper connections, and a more authentic understanding of what mattered most. I had entered this ordeal, fighting for a company, for my rightful place within it, for justice against deception. I emerged with something more valuable, a family defined by truth rather than appearances, relationships tested by fire and stronger for it, and a clear-eyed appreciation for the difference between what we inherit and what we build for ourselves. The company was secure now, its future brighter than ever, under leadership that understood both its history and its potential. Marcus was finding his own path to redemption, contributing his talents while working to rebuild trust day by day. My parents were freed from secrets that had burdened them for decades, able to love both their sons openly at last. And I had found a partnership with Catherine that neither of us could have predicted, one founded on shared values rather than shared history, on choosing what was right over what was easy. As we stood there in the gathering darkness, the lights from the house casting long shadows across the lawn, I realized that the most powerful lesson in all of this wasn't about business strategy or family dynamics or even the importance of truth. It was about the courage to let go of what you thought you were entitled to in order to discover what you truly deserve, and the wisdom to recognize that sometimes they aren't the same thing at all. "You know what I've learned from all this," I said, breaking the comfortable silence between us. "What's that?" Catherine asked. "That sometimes when someone says, 'You'll understand someday,' they're right. Not in the way they meant it, maybe, but understanding comes one way or another." She smiled, squeezing my hand. "And was it worth the journey? Even with all the pain along the way?" I thought about the company saved, the family transformed, the future opening before us all because of a betrayal that had forced us to confront truths too long buried. "Every step," I assured her. "Every single step." Have you ever experienced a betrayal that eventually led to something better? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this tale of family forgiveness and finding strength in unexpected places resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that sometimes our greatest disappointments can lead to our most meaningful growth. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, understanding often comes when we're ready for it, not when we demand it.